Hi, today we will be focusing on the perspective on the civil rights movement in the 1960s. So we will start off with a 7-minute do now that will focus on what is the civil rights movement, who is Martin Luther King, and how does he contribute to the civil rights movement. What do you know about Malcolm X? What do you know about the Black Panther Party? And finally, in your opinion, what does a truly equal society look like? And what would you need to be done to make such a society a reality? Objective for today's class. Students will be able to identify and analyze different perspectives on the civil rights movement from the 1960s by analyzing primary sources from the era and engaging in debates where they argue in favor of various perspectives. Plans for today's class. During the 1960s, different groups within the civil rights movement disagreed about how to best achieve racial equality. Today, we will explore the differing perspective of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and the Black Panther Party. Today, we will go through a brief background of the political benefits of each perspective, analyze primary sources from each perspective, and engage in a class discussion where we all occupy these different points of view. What is the Civil Rights Movement? The Civil Rights Movement was an organized effort by Black Americans to end racial discrimination and gain equal rights under the law. It began in the 1940s and ended in the late 1960s. Who is MLK? Martin Luther King Jr., original name Michael King Jr., born January 15, 1929, Atlanta, Georgia. He was a Baptist minister and social activist who led the civil rights movement in the United States from the mid 1950s until his death by assassination in 1968. His leadership was fundamental to that movement's success in ending the legal segregation of African Americans in the South and other parts of the United States. King rose to national prominence as head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which promoted nonviolent tactics such as Massive March on Washington 1963 to achieve the civil rights. How did he contribute to the civil rights movement? He organized a number of marches and protests. He was instrumental in the Memphis sanitation workers' strike, the Montgomery bus boycott, and the March on Washington. King believed that the Christian doctrine of love operating through the Gandhi method of nonviolence was the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom. King says that Gandhi was the first person to transform Christian love into powerful weapon for social change, what gave King the social reform method he was looking for. And lastly, King sought equality in human rights for African Americans, the economy disadvantaged, and all victims of injustice throughout peaceful protest. Now we are going to watch a short clip on how MLK contribute to the civil rights movement. And following that, we will have a small turn and talk for 2 minutes on what the students' major takeaways are.
The Black Panther Party started in Oakland, California in 1966 by Huey Newton as a group that could protect and defend people of color from police brutality. This party started as a group of 5 African American men who would legally stand armed near police to ensure the police would not mistreat people of color. The Black Panther Party quickly gained popularity across America, and membership reached a peak in 1970 with offices in 68 cities and thousands of members. The Black Panther Party became a united group of people advocating for social reforms, across the United States. So the Black Panther Party started out in Oakland, California, and it was a group of five friends who were tired of the police brutality going on in their city, and they felt like they needed to do something. So they took matters into their own hands. In California at the time, it was totally legal to openly carry, which means you could have a firearm with you as long as it was registered in your name. So, what these five men would do was if a police pulled over somebody of color or stopped somebody of color on the street, they would just stand nearby and watch the police, kind of to intimidate them with and they were armed, and they would just stand by, make sure the police didn't let the power get to their head, and make sure that they weren't mistreating anybody. And the Black Panther Party um, started as about a year, 2 years after Malcolm X was assassinated. um, so just to give you an idea of the time frame of this movement. Black Panther Party political ideology. Beliefs. The Black Panther Party distinguished between racist and non racist whites and aligned themselves with progressive members of the latter group. So the Black Panther Party did a lot of collaboration with other social justice groups, not just African American social justice groups, but LGBTQ, the women's movement. They even had some relationship with, um, Chinese and Japanese social justice movements. And they felt as though, all these people were being repressed, and they needed to work together to really make social justice changes. They were all being oppressed by the government. So if they all came together, that would kind of be the best way to create reform in America. African American capitalists and elites could and typically did exploit and oppress others, particularly the African American working class. Um, so the Black Panther Party believed that um, kind of black on black crime, but in the sense of, the African Americans of wealth and high social class didn't give back to the low income African American communities. They didn't help low income African American communities. Instead, some of them exploited and oppressed others, and they were very much against that. And they knew that it wasn't just about having the same skin color, but it was about having the same ideology, which is something they really spoke about. Economic exploitation is at the root of all oppression in the United States. Abolishing capitalism is a prerequisite of social justice. The big thing that the Black Panther Party was against was capitalism. They had a Marxist ideology which started out in Russia, or former Soviet Union, and it was the idea that capitalism wasn't the best um, form of economy in the world, and instead it was socialism. So they wanted to end capitalism and move towards socialism, which is the Marxist ideology. The Black Panther Party felt as though capitalism helped perpetuate inequalities throughout the United States, and they were very much against that. This Marxist ideology actually it was very controversial at the time because, it was seen as ending capitalism was seen as a threat, or being against capitalism was seen as a threat to the American government. And this caused the Black Panther Party to be on a lot of FBI radar. and actually a lot of them got in trouble by the FBI, and the government at the time kind of portrayed the Black Panther Party to be more of a gang rather than a social movement and political movement, and this was because of that Marxism ideology. The Black Panther Party did a lot for Black and Black and low income communities in the United States. They did breakfast programs to give kids breakfast before they went to school. Um, kitchen pantries in neighborhoods to help people struggling. There was a lot that they did, but because of this Marxist ideology, they were very much looked down on by the United States government. Black Panther Party political ideology. Beliefs. The Black Panther Party distinguished between racist and non racist whites and aligned themselves with progressive members, got in trouble by the FBI and
Another important perspective in the civil rights movement in the 1960s was that of Malcolm X. So before we learn about Malcolm X's political perspective, let's talk a little bit about his personal background. So Malcolm X was born in Nebraska in 1925 as Malcolm Little. His father was a prominent Black minister who promoted ideas of Black pride and self-reliance. So sort of this idea that Black people should be proud of their cultural achievements and proud of the color of their skin. And because he had this ideology and promoted these ideas, his family was frequently harassed by racist groups such as the Ku Klux Klan. When Malcolm was 6, his father died. While the death was officially ruled a streetcar accident, most people in the Black community believed that he was murdered by a group of local racist white people. And in addition to this sort of traumatic experience that Malcolm had when he was a kid, Malcolm faced a lot of racism within the school system. So one time, he expressed interest to a teacher about becoming a lawyer when he grew up, and his teacher told him it would be better if he chose a more realistic profession for Black people, such as a carpenter or a laborer. And so, because of these experiences, Malcolm became disenchanted with his education, and he dropped out of school. And he became a criminal in Boston, working as a drug dealer. And he was arrested at the age of 19 and sentenced to prison. And prison was a really formative experience for Malcolm. He really changed his ways and his ideas. He discovered a religion called the Nation of Islam, which was a group that combined aspects of the Muslim faith and aspects of Black pride. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the Nation of Islam in depth in a few slides. But Malcolm converted to the Nation of Islam, and he changed his last name from Little to X because he considered Little to be a name given to his family by former slave owners. So by changing his name to X, he saw himself as liberating himself from the oppression of his former name. So just as a discussion question, I want you to think about how might Malcolm X's early life experiences impact his future ideology? What do you predict? And why do you think Malcolm changed his name? Why do you think names are so important to identity? And yeah, think about that. So one of the most crucial aspects of Malcolm X's ideology and perspective on the civil rights movement was an idea called Black nationalism. So Black nationalism argues that the best way to promote equality for Black people in America is to create separate economic and cultural institutions. So that means separate black schools, promoting separate black businesses, black churches, essentially strengthening the black community separately. And so this is notable because it's very different from what Martin Luther King argued for, which was integration into white society. So Martin Luther King argued we need schools to serve both black and white people. We need integration of businesses. Malcolm X and other black nationalists really thought white America is always going to be oppressive to us. They're never going to welcome us. So we need to create our own separate society. We can't rely on white society because white society is inherently against us. Another important idea within black nationalism is that of black pride. And this goes along very much with the idea of the education system. So a black nationalist would argue that we need to create our own separate black schools where we could teach about black culture and promote racial pride. By having integrated schools, that's only going to promote self-hatred and a denial of our community heritage. Another interesting aspect of Malcolm X's ideology when it comes to black nationalism is around violence and community self-defense. So remember that Martin Luther King argued that protest always has to be nonviolent. Malcolm X is going to disagree very much and say black people need to be able to defend themselves against white violence. And if this includes using violence ourselves, then so be it. So some of the key differences, while Martin Luther King argues for integration and having black and white people live together, Malcolm X argues for separation and the creation of a separate society, essentially, for black people. And also around the idea of the use of violence. While Martin Luther King believes that violence is never justified, Malcolm X argues that in order to defend ourselves, sometimes we need to use force and violence. So I want you to think about, as a discussion question, which perspective do you think is better for promoting racial equality? What are the advantages of Martin Luther King's ideas? And what are the advantages of Malcolm X's ideas? What are the disadvantages of each? So think about that. So in addition to black nationalism, another crucial aspect of Malcolm X's ideology is the Nation of Islam. So if you recall from before, the Nation of Islam was the religious group that Malcolm X converted to while he was in prison. And the Nation of Islam is a religious group of black Americans who believed that Islam was the original religion of African peoples, and that Christianity was a force of white oppression that robbed black people of their original culture, which the Nation of Islam argues is Muslim culture. So the Nation of Islam in many ways combines aspects of Islam with the black nationalism that we were talking about. It promotes ideas of racial pride, of promoting black culture, black businesses. Interestingly, it has a strong emphasis on people's names. So, as we talked about in prison, Malcolm X changed his name from Malcolm Little to Malcolm X because Little was considered a slave name or a name given to his family by slave owners. And this is a pretty big part of being part of the Nation of Islam. So, for example, Cassius Clay, who was a world champion boxer in the 1960s, joins the Nation of Islam and he becomes Muhammad Ali. So this idea of changing your slave name or your white given name to a chosen Islamic name is really important to the Nation of Islam. And so some discussion questions. What do you think is symbolic about the idea of changing your name and how it relates to fighting racism and promoting racial identity? And also, to what extent do you think that majority cultures can be oppressive to minority groups? So, do you think the Nation of Islam is right when they argue that forces such as white European culture and Christianity are oppressive to minority groups in America? So now we're going to engage in a small group activity. You're going to be put into breakout rooms, and you will each be given a primary source to analyze. It will either be a speech by Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, or the Black Panthers. So you will analyze this primary source and then present to the class. So one thing that's important to think about when you're analyzing is perspective. So what is the political perspective of the person making the speech? What are their arguments about racial justice, civil rights, and the methods of achieving equality? So perhaps if I was analyzing Malcolm X, I would emphasize the way he's emphasizing separation as a strategy to achieve equality. If I was analyzing Martin Luther King Jr., I might look at how he emphasizes integration as a strategy. So think about political perspective. What is this person saying? What is the argument they're making? And the next thing I would like you to do is to think about your evaluation of the argument. So how might someone argue against the speaker? And also, as a group, do you agree or do you disagree? So go into your small groups, watch these videos, and then we'll come back and you can present about perspective and evaluation of the argument.
I have the
So excellent job with your presentations on your primary sources. Now we're going to do a second group activity, a political debate. So you're going to go back into your same groups and you're going to think about why is the perspective given in your video, that of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, or the Black Panthers, why is that perspective the best one in terms of achieving racial equality in the 1960s? So I'd like you guys to prepare in groups and think about some arguments you want to make in favor of your perspective. And then after that, we're going to engage in a debate. So you're going to have to make your arguments to your classmates and sort of give your best case as to why your perspective is better than the other group's perspective. So I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with. So head into your groups and then come back and be prepared to engage in this informal debate on these perspectives. Great job.
Exit ticket reflection. Before you leave class today, write a brief paragraph expressing your beliefs about the ideas we discussed in class. Think about the following. Which political perspective, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Black Panther Party, resonates the most with you and why? Which political perspective did not resonate with you? How might some of these ideas be applicable to modern conversation about racial inequality? Submit your response via Blackboard Dropbox. Thank you.